He created mankind as a special creation to have that relationship with him. But he also gave them tasks to do. I was learning the cello for a time and I was playing the cello, but it has been a long time since I've played the cello, and I cannot say that I play the cello. Because while I say that our focus should not just be on the life that is to come, we also need to remember that we have a role to play here on this earth. We have a purpose here on this earth. God requires things of us here on this earth. But still, our ultimate destination is a life with God. Hello and welcome back to the Banner Bearers YouTube channel. Today we're going to be looking at the purpose of being a follower of Jesus. Is there a purpose for our life now? Or are we really just kind of looking for our ticket to heaven? What does the Bible have to say about this? And we'll be looking at some Bible verses that we can lean on for this. And if you're new to the channel, Banner Bearers is a ministry aimed at engaging in and equipping and encouraging other people to engage in spiritual warfare. Because our fight is not a fight against flesh and blood, but against spirits and principalities. And everything that we see happening here in this world is a result of things that have happened or are happening in the spiritual. And if you are new to the channel, please do consider subscribing if you'd like to see more content like this. And if this video has blessed you, please do like and share and leave any comments or feedback down below. Now on to today's video. People might think, well, what does this have to do with spiritual warfare? But of course, our lives and our walk daily with Jesus is an absolute vital part of anything that we do, especially, not just only, but especially spiritual warfare. It's key that we have a healthy living relationship with Jesus. And this sort of video is really just helping us to have that foundation. And it came around because there were a number of discussions, and I say very often in my videos that I don't like using the word Christian because I find many people have that as a title. And by that I mean many people just say, well, I am a Christian, and that's it, and they don't do anything else. And it's in some ways maybe somebody went to medical school and they passed their exams and they are officially a doctor. But if they're not working in a hospital, are you a doctor? Is being a doctor something that you do? Or is it just a certificate that you have, a title that you have? Or with musicians, I was learning the cello for a time and I was playing the cello, but it has been a long time since I've played the cello, and I cannot say that I play the cello, because I have played it, but I don't actually play it anymore. And in this same sort of sense, can we say, well, I am a Christian, regardless of what we are doing? Or is being a follower of Jesus, a disciple of Jesus, maybe a better term, something that is inherently something that we do, not just something that we are? Can we be a follower of Jesus if we are not following Jesus? So if we really use the proper term Christian, am I a Christian, or am I just using a title? Have I, in some ways, do I expect that I have received the title of being a Christian, but then I am no longer actually living that life? And so that's the basis for doing this video, really. And I'd like to jump straight into the first verse, which is Genesis 1:27-28. God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And so there we see really from the beginning of creation, mankind had a purpose. There was something that God created mankind to do. It wasn't just to live in paradise. It wasn't just to have communion with God. Those are very important. Those are very key. He created mankind as a special creation to have that relationship with him. But he also gave them tasks to do. There was an expectation on them. There was a purpose to the creation, not just the relationship, but also these tasks that God had given them to do. And I think that's very telling that from the very beginning, from the beginning of creation, it wasn't just about Adam and Eve being created, Adam and Eve being in the garden, Adam and Eve having a relationship with God. They were key. That was absolutely vital. That was a large part of why they were created. But they also had a purpose. And that was from the very beginning. And I think that's something that we should really keep in mind as we look at the next verses. And the next verse that I want to look at, it's Micah 6, verse 8. He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? And many people today who would call themselves Christians, maybe fewer of those people who would say, I am a follower of Christ, but certainly a lot of people who are Christians today, if you were to say to them, what does God require of you? They would say, well, nothing. God requires nothing of me. And we need to be mindful that we don't really fall into kind of a hyper grace. We also should not be in works-based religion. Absolutely not. Our salvation is not based on our works. But does God require anything of us? And certainly when we look at the book of Micah, yes, God does require something of us. There should be a way of life that we are leading. That's certainly something that was clear for God's people at the time of the prophet of Micah. They weren't just expecting a reward in the next life. They were also very much looking at the requirements that God had for them now. Now, of course, the question is, does this still apply to us? This was Old Covenant, and many people would say, well, yes, this was before Jesus died and rose again. And that then leads nicely on to the next verse, which is Matthew 22, 37 to 39. And he said to them, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now, of course, these were the words of Jesus here, and really echoing what was there in Micah, or maybe even some would say refining it and bringing it to in many ways, a wider point, but one that is much more applicable. And then we really would struggle to say, okay, well, how many of the words of Jesus can we ignore as it was Old Covenant versus New Covenant? Jesus was the one who was coming to reveal everything through his life and his words, and to bring us then from the Old Covenant into the New. And so for Jesus here to be reiterating that these two commandments, he goes on to say, all of the law hangs upon that. And whilst we are no longer under the Mosaic law, we are under a new law, a law of grace. And so we have to be very careful of still saying today, well, God required something of the people in Micah's time, but he has no requirements of us today. I think that we need to take Jesus seriously. We need to take his words as something that we have to be very mindful of today. And so we have these two very broad subjects here. And a question that we should be asking ourselves is, are these reflected in my life? And if not, what does that mean? And if so, are there still areas where I can improve? If I'm honest, is God the first place in my heart? Do I love him with everything that I am and everything that I have? And do you truly love your neighbor as yourself? We, of course, want to make sure that we're cared for and looked after. And the Bible makes it very clear that it is very important that anyone who follows Jesus make sure that the family is taken care of first and foremost. But then in all other ways, do we then love our neighbors? Do we have the the heart for other people that Jesus had, that God had, that he sent his son to die for us? Do we have that love for our neighbor? Are we concerned with other people? How often do we pray for people in our congregation, in our family? Not just, do we give them money? Do we try and make sure that they're cared for in that way? But do we also pray for them? Do we really have a heart and a love for other people? This is not just something that is a nice to have. This is something that Jesus said we should be doing. And then the next verse that I want to read, it is 2 Corinthians 5:20. Therefore we are ambassadors for Christ, as though God were making an appeal through us. We beg you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. Now I did put the emphasis myself there in that verse, because we see very much that we have a role to play here on earth. We are ambassadors. Now an ambassador, I love this verse and I love this imagery as well, because an ambassador represents a nation in a foreign country. And in that sense, we are representing God's kingdom in this world. We are in this world, but not of this world, in much the same way that an ambassador lives in a country, but they are not of that country. Their passport, their citizenship, everything to do with their identity is in the original country. And they represent that country, the ruler of that country. They represent them in the country where they live. And we represent Jesus here in the world. And again, some people might then start to see that as a passive thing. And, I kind of people know that I'm a Christian and they see that I'm a Christian. But then we see in this Bible verse that there was certainly an active part. We beg you on behalf of Christ. So again, it's very much an active thing. And many people would say, well, I am not called as an evangelist. It's like, no, we are all called to evangelize. We might not be called to be evangelists in a very specific way. But certainly evangelism is something that is for every single believer to engage in. And so we are called to be active in calling people to Jesus. Not just saying, well, they can see it in my life, but also being active and entreating people on behalf of Jesus. Again, it comes back into this. Do we have a heart for people? Is our love for our neighbor stronger than our fear of being ridiculed and fear of rejection and general fear of man? Because we are called to engage with people. That is one thing that is very much part of our lives. Being a Christian is not just about going to heaven instead of going to hell. We are also called to help other people come to a knowledge of Jesus. I'm not a Calvinist, and I say that very often, and so for me, this idea in Calvinism, I find it to be a little bit alien, and I'm sure some Calvinists will say, no, we are called still to evangelize, even though it doesn't really matter in some ways if you really truly believe in Calvinism. But still, we see verses like this, and for those of us who are not Calvinists, it's very clear. We are called to go out and help people come to a knowledge of Jesus Christ. Not just through what we do, but also what we say, by going to them and preaching to them the good news. That is very much a purpose of being a Christian. And if we are not doing that, are we living the life that we are called to do? Are we doing what God requires of us? And the last verse that I want to share, it's in Revelation 21:3 and 4. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is among men, and he will dwell among them, and they shall be his people, and God himself will be among them, and he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will no longer be any death. There will no longer be any mourning, or crying, or pain. The first things have passed away. And for me, I just wanted to close with that particular Bible verse, because while I say that our focus should not just be on the life that is to come, we also need to remember that we have a role to play here on this earth. We have a purpose here on this earth. God requires things of us here on this earth. But still, our ultimate destination is a life with God. When He will come down, when Jesus Christ returns at Armageddon, when Satan has been bound and ultimately then destroyed completely, when we are returned to that real-time, intimate relationship with God, where He will dwell with us, and there will no longer be any death. We need to bear in mind that is our ultimate aim. We are not just to build a world here on this earth. We have to be mindful as well of what is to come. And so many people tend to fall into one or the other. Either they forget this world and they focus purely on that which is to come, or they focus too much on this world and they forget that we have got another destination, that we are not in the promised land, that we are in the desert at the moment, and we're representing Him here, but then His kingdom will come. And of course, sometimes in our lives we can be more in one phase and less in the other, of course. But it's just also to have that mindset where we think, well, yes, there is still this life to come, and I have that always in mind, but I don't forget that I am here on this earth, and God has called me to live a certain way here on this earth. Now, those were just a few of the Bible verses that really bring that out. That from the beginning of creation and through the time of the Old Testament and even then into the New, being a Christian is not just a ticket to heaven. It's not just living a life like everyone else here on earth, or even less of a life than people here on earth, not being allowed to do certain things. Like, I'm not allowed to do this, I'm not allowed to do that, and I have to survive through this, and I have to put up and suffer under not being allowed to do what I want to do, and then I get to go to heaven, and that's my reward. That's very much a twisted and medieval view of being a follower of Jesus. Because ultimately we are called to look to our future, absolutely. We will have a reward in heaven. But at the same time, God has put callings on our lives here. He asks us to work with Him in the harvest that He set out. We have a purpose in God's grand scheme from the beginning of time until His return. We play a part in that. And we have to find out what our particular part is and work with God in fulfilling the things that He asked us to do. And so we need to also be mindful that we do have a purpose here on earth. It's not just not doing certain things. It's not just avoiding sinning in that sense. It's looking forward to a time. And instead of just avoiding doing certain things or not being allowed to do certain things, is spending time in the Spirit and really having ourselves change so we no longer want to do those things. Dying to self and letting Jesus Christ live through us. That is ultimately a huge part of our lives as followers of Jesus. Maybe not as people who use the title of Christians, but as followers of Jesus, that is what we are called to do here on earth. So please do bear in mind that yes, there is a point to being a Christian. There is things that we have to do here on this earth. And people might say, well, have to do. So, well, if Jesus says, hey, if you're my followers, then you will be doing these things. Then if we want to say that we're followers of Jesus, then, He's put conditions in place, not me. And if Jesus Himself has put conditions on something, then it's certainly wrong of anyone here on earth to take those conditions away. And again, I'm not talking about works-based salvation. That is not what I'm talking about at all. But again, I use the example of a marriage. If somebody says, well, I love my wife, and yet from their actions or their inactions, they make it very clear that they do not love their wife, then does it matter that they say that they love their wife? And if we say, yes, I love Jesus, I believe in Jesus, then if our lives do not show that, then what does that mean? If we say, yes, I believe in the sacrifice that Jesus made, and therein lies my salvation, if our way of life, if our attitude to everything that we do and say shows that we do not actually believe that Jesus Christ is Lord, then what does that mean about our salvation? And what about you? How do you feel about this? Are you looking for your purpose in your life with Jesus? Do you already know what your purpose is? And if so, please do drop a comment down below. Or do you think that really, no, once I have said, Jesus, you are my Lord, then that is it, and there are no more requirements of me? Then please do, I would also love to hear from you, especially Bible verses. And also then what you do with the Bible verses that I've shared today. How do we feel about that? But what I'd like to do now is just close in prayer. Lord, thank you that you do call us not just to a future life with you, but also to a life with you here on earth. That you want to make us more like you. You want to take away the things in our lives that break a relationship with you and replace them with godly things that forward your kingdom, that bring people out of the darkness into the light, that can help to expose the ways of darkness in this world, and really bring people the peace and hope that you offer to everyone on this earth. Help us to be your ambassadors. Give us clarity on our purpose with you. In Jesus' name, amen. So if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, be blessed.